Hello, Professor Rosemary here, and it's my birthday. That means I get special birthday powers and you have to do what I say. And I say, subscribe. Do it now. But seriously though, click the button. Now, every year for my birthday, I tell myself that I want to make something cool featuring one of my favorite Pokemon. It just so happened as well that I scrolled past this Tinkaton figure, and I knew I just had to turn it into a cake. So with that said, let's get making. I wouldn't say Tinkaton is among my top 10 favorites, but I've had one with me throughout my entire Paldea adventure. Competitive players may not have the best opinion of her, but I find her design absolutely adorable and I had a lot of fun with one on my team. The most iconic thing about her design is the giant hammer she wields made of dead metal birds. With that said, I decided to recreate this figurine's pose and make the hammer entirely out of cake. Now, to not have the cake buckling and crumbling under its own weight and complexity, I made a full-scale plan of my project as usual. It's not as complicated as it looks, I'll show you as we go. But to break it down, we have a central support rod that holds a horizontal rod for the hammer and Tinkaton, and one more rod here to prevent the long rod from teetering or swiveling. There are also 3 cake boards supported by dowels so the bottom cakes don't get crushed by the ones on top. To prevent the cake from toppling to the side, I went with something girthy and weighted for the bottommost cake board. Since this cake board wasn't available in a smaller size, I cut it down using the power of friendship. Shout out to fellow YouTuber and friend Grace. I did not know how much I stuck to the saw until she helped me do it. Check out her channel for all things sewing and fashion. Once I had the size I needed, I plotted and punched out 2 holes for where I'll insert some threaded metal rods, secured using some suitably sized washers and nuts. To achieve the effect of Tinkaton floating in mid-air, I used a longer threaded rod as the hammer handle. Since I couldn't find any parts that allowed me to attach the rods perpendicularly, I decided to make my own using 2 nuts and super glue. In case you're confused, the glue is for the nuts and not your fingers. I apparently didn't get the memo. To finish off the base, I attached a more lightweight cake board and adjusted it to the height I needed using more washers and nuts. This one was also cut from a larger board. I also made sure to cover everything in contact with the cake with aluminum foil to make it food safe. So what's the moral of the story? If nothing out there is able to support your dreams, take matters into your own hands and be your own best support. Okay, you guys came for cake and not a TED talk, so let's move on. I prepared some edible glue the day before I wanted to make my fondant Tinkaton. I simply mixed together some water and CMC until I got a goopy consistency. Your mixture will be clumpy now, but after getting wrapped and spending a night in the fridge, the clumps would have absorbed the water and disappeared. I always make my glue thicker than I need it because it's easier to add water to thin it out, which I always do, than to add more powder to thicken it. I mixed in CMC to my fondant as well as I colored them. This helps your fondant dry faster, especially in humid places like mine. I simply add half a teaspoon at a time until the fondant felt stiffer and not tacky. And then it's a therapeutic montage of actually sculpting our fairy friend. I made a skeleton using aluminum wire and foil so that the figure is more lightweight as compared to using solid fondant. This also helps the figure dry easier and gives it a more solid internal support. Once I've reached certain points, I stuck the figure into the oven at 50 degrees Celsius for 5 to 10 minutes just to set the shape of it. If anything needs to be stuck to these dried surfaces, that's where our edible glue comes in. To finish off my pieces, I bake them at the same temperature for about half an hour until they're mostly dry, before applying luster dust where appropriate. They then go back in the oven to dry while we assemble our cake. I'm using a chocolate cake mix for convenience, which I baked a few days prior, wrapped while hot to preserve moisture, thawing them out on the day I needed them. Since I planned out the cake using my cookie cutter set, I just have to cut out the shapes I need using said cookie cutters. I also adjusted the height of the cakes while referring to my plan. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to slot in the cake from the side instead of from the top. I just did what made sense to me in the moment, but I'm basically making sure that there is frosting between each layer of cake and outside the cake. This acts as glue for the cake layers and fondant later. Oh, and I'm using store-bought frosting for even more convenience. It's my birthday, I can do whatever I want. For the final cake board, which I cut out from the bottom of a sturdy cupcake liner, I'm slotting in 3 chopsticks cut to the required height to act as supports. After making sure the entire cake is thinly frosted, we can layer on our fondant to look like metal panels. A fun thing about this is that Tinkaton's hammer is pretty crudely made. That means we can be sloppy with the fondant and it'll still be acceptable. Though one thing I chickened out on was to make this part hollow. If we were to be anatomically correct about this, we can see that Tinkaton starts out with a rattle, which it wraps in metal plates to make a hollow core hammer as it evolves. I was too scared that I'd jeopardize the structural integrity of the cake, so I simply went with a stylistic choice to make that part out of solid cake. Now that the fondant is on, we just need to coat the whole thing in so much luster dust that my poop will become a fairy type. 老塞老塞亮晶晶，马桶都是小星星. But I have to say, painting with luster dust is oddly satisfying and therapeutic. And finally, for the cherry on top, or rather the fairy on the side. We just have to try very hard not to break the figure or the cake and we are done! So there you have it, a gravity-defying Tinkaton birthday cake. Completely drying the figure definitely helped reduce its weight and made it light enough to stay upright. I was quite ready to face the disappointment of the whole thing just falling apart, so imagine my excitement when it actually held. So that's all for now. Subscribe for more daunting Pokemon food, leave your suggestions in the comments and I'll see you guys soon. Bye bye!